Today is Resurrection Sunday, and even today, a man being brought back to life from the dead remains just as controversial as it did 2,000 years ago. A Christian brother, Peter Hitchens, the brother of notorious New Atheist speaker Christopher Hitchens, and one of the four horsemen of the New Atheism movement, when asked on Q&A, the ABC TV show, what is a dangerous idea that could change the world for the better, he responded, "The most dangerous idea in human history and philosophy remains the belief that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and rose from the dead. And that is the most dangerous idea you will ever encounter." That is quite a bold claim to make. Is it really such a dangerous idea? The host, Tony Jones, couldn't leave that statement in the air and asked Peter to clarify why it was such a dangerous idea. So he continued, "It alters the whole human behavior and all our responsibilities. It turns the universe from a meaningless chaos into a designed place where there is justice and there is hope. If the resurrection is true, it changes everything that we know and have built our lives upon. It is a dangerous idea because it changes everything we know about this world." So today we're looking at Mark 15, verse 40 to 16, and we're going to look at the first important point Mark gives to us. That is, your sin, his death. Before we continue, I just want to mention why we're stopping at Mark 16:8. I do not believe the longer ending of Mark was originally part of Mark's gospel. The evidence is quite convincing internally and also externally. As far as I'm concerned, Mark ends at verse 8, and the Bibles have included the longer ending of Mark just to cover their bases. It's just a just-in-case sort of deal. Now, in verse 40, we are told that Mary Magdalene, Mary and Salome were looking on from a distance. These women witnessed the events and the death of Jesus. They certainly displayed more faith or more devotion than the disciples who ended up running away. But this verse doesn't paint them in a good light either. R.C. Sproul, when speaking on this verse, says that you can't be a follower of Jesus from a distance, and he's right. They aren't watching as a virtue of discipleship. They are watching as spectators, detached from what's going on. It's not a perception that leads to a conviction of faith. In fact, it is a strong contrast to what we saw in the previous section, where a centurion calls Jesus the Son of God. But being at a distance is only the result of what they have just witnessed. They were there, but they didn't associate themselves with him. The man they saw was a plague, condemned and cursed, while the centurion saw the Son of God. It really fulfills Psalm 38:11 when it says, "My friends and companions stand aloof from my plague, and my nearest kin stand far off." This contrast really puts a challenge before us, because even today, what separates us, believers and non-believers, is who was the man who hung on the cross. If we know who the man upon the cross truly is, it does truly change everything that we know about this world. For many, Jesus was a historical figure who died a terrible death. They wouldn't use the word cursed or a plague, but probably would use language like unfortunate or unlucky. But that's all Jesus is to those who agree with that statement. Just a historical man. And I would say that for the women, they haven't quite faced the reality of what's actually going on. They will eventually, by chapter 16, verse 8, when they run away in fear. But Jesus at this time, for them is at a distance. They haven't truly seen the man upon the cross. For the centurion, he is right next to Jesus. He witnesses the way Jesus died, and it was in that death that he believed. The events he saw snapped him into reality that Jesus had died and proved that he was truly the Son of God. The women, I believe, have not been confronted with that truth yet. At this point, they are scared. Sin continues to blind them from what is happening before them. That is the purpose of Jesus being placed upon that cross. Their sin and our sin. He became a curse upon that cross because of our sin. Jews knew that anyone who hung upon a tree was accursed by God. Deuteronomy 21, 22 to 23 is very clear about that fact. Jesus was accursed upon that cross. As Jewish women, they knew that. But instead of watching in faith, believing what Jesus had said, they watched from a distance, detached, failing to see what was happening. They haven't been confronted with the reality that Jesus was accursed because he was ransoming his life, giving himself up in death in place of ours. It was their death, our death, that Jesus took upon himself. But it is hard to see that when we are distant from him. It is hard to see when we don't recognize that it is the Son of God that hung upon that cross. But in order for this to actually be accomplished, in order for us to know that Jesus truly drank all of the cup of God's wrath, he truly had to die. And that's the purpose of the next section of the passage, where we're introduced to Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the council. He was one who was waiting for the kingdom of God. The Greek word we translate here as looking is usually associated with looking forward to or waiting for the coming Christ. And he found him. That's why, in contrast to the women, he took courage to ask for Pilate to give him the body. The disciples, Jesus' followers, including the women, are not seen very favourably by the end of Mark. But now you have a Jewish leader accepting Jesus for who he is, a Gentile and a Jew. In a matter of a few verses, have accepted Jesus, the Son of God. But as readers, the news isn't getting any better. Sometimes in TV shows or movies, to create suspense, they will kill off a very key and important character only to reveal at the end that they never really died. It was a ruse to escape or trick someone. Those familiar with Sherlock Holmes might remember that the author Arthur Conan Doyle killed Holmes off because he believed that the stories were distracting him from better things, and it made him sick to his stomach to have to write another story about Sherlock Holmes. The people were outraged. How dare they kill off such a beloved character? Men wore mourning bands on their arms. Women wore black mourning clothes the next day. Even the royal family were incredibly distraught by the demise of Holmes. Because of the backlash, Conan Doyle would resurrect Holmes and claim it was a ruse to escape Moriarty's men. The way he survived was quite ridiculous. He remembered some Japanese wrestling move that helped him survive the fall from a waterfall. Conan Doyle was paid a lot of money to bring him back, not to make a believable story. In a way, we too should be outraged that Jesus died. Deep down, as a reader, you hope it wasn't true. that in some way he managed to use some type of Japanese wrestling technique that helped him survive. But he died. The centurion confirms that. And Joseph takes him, wraps him, and places him in the tomb, and the women see where he is buried. He took the full cup of God's wrath on our behalf and suffered a death that belonged to us in order for God's justice to be accomplished for the sins of the world. Jesus truly had to die. Now, if Mark was to end the story right there, I think that would be such an anticlimactic way to finish a story of the king. But fortunately, the story continues and brings us to the second point: his resurrection, our hope. At the beginning of chapter 16, we have the women, after the Sabbath, going up to the tomb to anoint the dead body with spices. That the spices were used to cover up the smell of a decomposing body. But this is what this verse actually means. Their expectation was that Jesus was dead. In Mark, Jesus told the disciples that he was going to die, but on the third day rise from the dead. And anyone who believed in what Jesus had told them, they would have travelled up to the tomb where Jesus was buried to see whether or not his claim of resurrection was true. But no one believed him. The women didn't believe it. They were heading up there for a dead body. And it seems that they weren't prepared. They asked the question, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? And the stone was incredibly heavy. It took several men to move it. They walked all that way, and it only occurred to them that they couldn't move the stone. So they were expecting a dead body and not prepared. They wouldn't pass the scouts. Though as they looked upon the tomb, they didn't need to worry about the stone because someone else had removed it for them. Now, this is concerning in itself, but sitting on the right side of the tomb was a man dressed in white, and the women were alarmed. I was trying to think of a way to explain what they were experiencing at the time, and I think this is the best way. If you are a parent, sometimes you lose your children for a brief moment. I have with Robert, not out in public thankfully, but at our house next door. I was unloading the car and Robert was right next to me. I was talking on the phone to my dad and I looked and he was gone. The panic didn't quite set in straight away, but as I searched and couldn't find him, I could feel the anxiousness growing and I began to worry. I looked everywhere. What I didn't realise was that Robert had figured out how to open the gate and he was inside eating a sandwich. It is a feeling of panic or worry of losing something precious. For the women, they expected a closed tomb, but upon seeing the open tomb, they were worried. Perhaps the body had been stolen after all. But the angel offers comfort and hope. Chapter 16, verse 6 and 7. Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. The angel is reassuring the women. Do not panic. He has done what he told you he was going to do. This is the climax of this passage. Death did not have victory over him. God had brought him out from the grave. On Friday, I said that the people thought in order for the Christ to be vindicated, he needed to save himself while he was upon the cross. But God vindicated him by raising him from the dead. he was tried unjustly, but heaven gave its verdict. He was truly innocent. He was without sin. The resurrection confirms that. The women went to the tomb expecting a dead body, and they were unprepared for the task. Now they were unprepared for the reality that Jesus has risen. The spices are useless to them now. They've got it all wrong. James Edwards nails it. The living are consumed with death, but the crucified one is consumed with life. The women are given the opportunity to share the good news to the disciples of Jesus' resurrection, but verse 8 really leaves us hanging. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. What an abrupt way to end. Mark never really tells us how the word got out. From other accounts, we know that eventually they told the disciples. But Mark leaves the story on a cliffhanger. The women disobeyed. Before anyone jumps to the conclusion that Mark is a misogynist upholding the patriarchal system, I believe this is Mark being Mark, or should I say Peter. There are two reasons Mark would be doing this. First, this is my own theory. The Gospels were written to be read out loud. Mark's account is short. It's punchy. It's really designed to grab your attention. So I think it is only natural to want to have the audience at the edge of their seat, wanting more, expecting more. To leave on a cliffhanger invites more questions from the audience. The second reason, the women are used as a warning for all people. The angel offered them hope of the risen Christ, but their fear made them silent. As Sinclair Ferguson puts it, this fear is the response of men and women to Jesus as he shows his power and majesty as the Son of God. Therefore, Mark ends with encouragement and a warning. Do not respond the same way as the women. The risen Christ is both awesome in wonder, but also terrifying. It shatters all categories that we have accepted as normal. Death is not final. It changes everything we know about the world. Remember Peter Hitchenson's answer to the question. It was a dangerous idea. But I actually didn't finish the entire quote of Peter Hitchens. And he actually continues. Therefore, we all have a duty to discover the nature of that justice and work towards that hope. It alters us all. If we reject it, it alters us all as well. It is incredibly dangerous. It is why so many people turn against it. It is the hope of the resurrection that we work towards. We don't have a buried hope, we have a living one. Jason Mayer says we are no longer Saturday's children. The women were still living as if it was Saturday. The gloom of death surrounded them. Sunday hadn't truly come for them yet. But for those who believe today, you are Sunday's children. Your sin has been dealt with upon the cross. The death you deserved has been suffered by Jesus. The resurrection gives us hope that his sacrifice did not fail, but made a way for sinners to be forgiven. So Mark ends with a choice. You can either respond to Jesus' power to save and bring new life with fear and turning away, and rile up against the justice and the hope that the resurrection stands for. Or you can respond with awe that recognizes that the Son of God, who hung upon the tree, has resurrected into life and drives you to shout with confidence that he has risen. Let's pray.